This paper talks about a global internet governance. In 2012, there was World Conference on International Telecommunications. The conference closed with 89 states signing, including Russia and China, and 55 states, including the United States, dismissing a proposal to revise the existing regulations. This outcome was unusual, especially when we contrast with the consensus-based decision-making in the International Telecommunication Union, which is a specialized UN organization established in 1865. In this paper, the author delves into a question of why and analyzes different motivations of states that signed the new ITR. There is no single regime that governs the internet all over the world. The current process of internet governance serves the United States commercial and security interests because the internet emerged in the United States and the United States government initially set up governance structures. Other states have criticized the US dominance, and China has been actively challenging the structures. Because of this, the author focuses on the power struggle at the 2012 World Conference on International Telecommunications. What was the issue then? The reform demands a UN takeover of the internet. The proposal calls for government cooperation and a greater role of ITU. There are some controversies in terms of the preferences of individual states. First, domestic political structures. Some countries have similar preferences with the US liberalism, but there are many others having more illiberal stance. They substantively clash with US liberalism. Second, digital divide. The internet technology is unequally distributed across the world. Third, major powers' influence, such as the United States and China. In the next section, the author presents 5 theoretical expectations about the country's different motivation toward the proposal. First, more authoritarian governments were more likely to adopt the ITRs. Authoritarian states have different preference with the US liberalism. They are more likely to be threatened by a free and open internet that provides an alternative source of information. They also don't like the idea that internet can be used as a tool for mass mobilization. Second, developing countries and countries with low internet penetration were more likely to adopt the ITRs. Government in poorer countries and countries with no or little internet service want the ITU to play a greater role for ensuring equal access to internet resources and increasing the accountability of US-based private agents. They also want to overcome the current dominance of commercial interest. Third, less liberalized countries were more likely to adopt the ITRs. Governments that have been resisted liberalization of the telecommunication sector are more likely to increase the control of national regulators in internet governance through the ITU. The fourth hypothesis tests the major powers' influence. Dependence in matters of national security, trade, or aid on the US or China make countries more likely to align with the major powers' position on the ITRs. The last hypothesis is about the interaction effect between major powers' influence and a country's domestic institutions. Autocracies dependent in matters of national security, trade, or aid on the US or China are more likely than democracies to align with the major powers' position on the ITRs. The dependent variable is a binary measure of whether a country adopted the revised ITR. The author operationalized political regime type as a dummy variable based on polity score. Developmental stage is measured with the GDP per capita, but more specifically, the number of internet users per 100 people is used to measure the degree to which a country has adopted ICT. As for the degree of liberalization, the author includes an index measuring the degree of competition, foreign ownership, and the nature of regulation in the telecommunication sector. Major powers' influence is measured by U.S. formal defense alliances, U.S. troop-based dummy, trade with the U.S. and China, and U.S. provision of development aid. The author limits China's influence to economic aspects. The author tests her hypotheses by running a series of cross-section logistic regressions, and she finds strong support for her first two hypotheses. Regime types and development level explain ITR adoptions. In more detail, more authoritarian governments were more likely to adopt the ITRs, and developing countries and countries with low internet penetration were more likely to adopt the ITRs. However, she finds only little evidence of the major powers' influence, security or trade relations to neither or the two powers influenced countries. However, there is an interesting finding about the interaction effect. When we see the dotted line of this graph, aid dependence on the United States decreases the likelihood of autocracies to sign the ITRs, but we cannot find such effect from the solid line, in democracies. From this paper, we can conclude that the adoption of the new ITRs can be explained with authoritarian desire to control domestic populations, developmental gaps, and some of major powers' influence, especially in authoritarian countries.